There's no truth, right, that you're actually going to switch parties, because I know Trump has offered you. I mean, you've said I would be a Republican.
That's and if I ever decide to change, and I won't, I'll be have me on and I will announce that. But it's not gonna. It's like I'm a committed Democrat, even though if I vote 93% of the time.
With the Democrats.
I thought we were supposed to be a big tent party. So I'm not really sure how I become an issue for any of the Democrats, just having some different views in these other issues.
So the new generation is ready for socialism. Problem is, they may be ready for a little too much socialism. Almost 2/3 of Sanders voters want free college and free universal health coverage for no more than an extra $1,000 in taxes. Even though that's not really socialism. That's Santaism.
Bill Maher and John Fetterman were never expected to step out of line, but that's exactly what's happening. Instead of staying quiet, both have openly challenged their own political circle, pointing out flaws that many prefer to ignore. What started as mild frustration has turned into direct, unapologetic criticism that cuts against the usual party messaging. As tensions build inside the Democratic Party and internal disagreements become harder to hide, their voices are beginning to sound less like loyal supporters and more like warnings from within. Before we break it down, make sure to subscribe, and let's dive into what's really happening behind the scenes.
You used the term an orgy of socialism recently. You said that what you see in the Democratic Party. I do too.
Well, I mean, you have whether it's like the mayor in Seattle. I mean, she's absolutely a socialist. In New York, and a lot of these candidates across the country, and that's really moving towards that. And people that are proud to be labeled as a socialist. That used to be was a smear when I was running my first cycle, and now that's becoming more normalized. And now I think that's a very dangerous, slippery slope for us to be.
According to John Fetterman, the DNC is heading down a path that could become difficult to recover from if left unchecked. It's not just routine internal disagreement anymore, it's a growing concern about the party's overall direction. And to some observers, he may be pointing at something real, a gradual shift in tone and priorities that's been building for years. Critics argue that elements of modern democratic politics are drifting further left, with ideas associated with democratic socialism becoming more visible in mainstream debates. Figures like Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and rising progressive voices such as Zohran Mamdani are often cited as examples of this shift in influence. This evolving landscape has also drawn attention from commentators like Bill Maher, who has increasingly sounded the alarm about where the party might be headed. Whether viewed as a necessary correction or a risky transformation, the debate inside the party is becoming harder to ignore, and moments like this suggest the internal divide is only getting sharp.
And now I've spoke to people that had to live under socialism and or communism, and they are morons if they think that socialism is the answer. I've lived under that, and thank God we are now.
We already have a great deal of socialism, and I've made the point a million times on the show, as we should. All Western democracies are quasi-socialist. There are certain things that the government should do. You don't want the private enterprise to be controlling the Marine Corps, and we need Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid. Obviously, these things we have socialism. They're just proposing something.
What people often overlook is that a version of socialism already exists within the system, built in to soften the hardest edges of capitalism. Programs like Social Security, Medicare, and public education create a hybrid structure that has balanced market-driven economics with basic public support for decades, and for a long time that balance has largely held. But figures like Zohran Mamdani and Bernie Sanders are often described by critics as going far beyond that framework, pushing proposals that expand government responsibility into areas like healthcare, housing, transportation, and everyday living costs. Supporters argue these ideas are necessary responses to rising inequality and affordability pressures, while opponents see them as a fundamental shift in how the system is designed to function. On the surface, these policies can sound straightforward and appealing, but in reality they raise difficult questions about funding, trade-offs, and long-term sustainability, because when government expands its role significantly, the costs don't disappear, they are redistributed. And that tension is where the debate continues to intensify.
By the way, you said socialism, dirty word? Yeah, yes and no. What really was a dirty word, which isn't anymore, is communism.
Yeah.
I mean, this woman in New York who is Mayor Mondami's right-hand woman, she tweets out, elect more communists.
Bill Maher's concern isn't really about Donald Trump. It's about what he sees happening inside his own political camp and the risk of alienating enough voters to hand Republicans an easy path to victory. His argument is straightforward. Much of mainstream America isn't embracing far-left economic ideas in the way some activists assume. In key swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Georgia, voters are typically focused on everyday issues such as affordability, safety, and a government that feels present but not overbearing. From this perspective, any sharp move too far left can risk pushing moderate voters away rather than bringing them in. Maher's broader warning is that repeated electoral losses could deepen existing fractures within the Democratic Party and make internal recovery even harder over time. Meanwhile, critics argue that parts of the party's progressive wing don't fully acknowledge these political limits, which is where much of the current tension comes from.
The new generation is ready for socialism. Problem is, they may be ready for a little too much socialism. Almost 2/3 of Sanders voters want free college and free universal health coverage for no more than an extra $1,000 in taxes, even though that's not really socialism. That's Santaism. And look, no one is arguing that millennials haven't gotten a rotten deal in this economy, but they've also gotten too used to getting shit for free. We've accepted that the new normal in America is people in their 20s and even 30s still on their parents' cell phone plans and health care plans, and mom and dad still paying the car insurance, and almost 1/3 of them are still living.
A growing number of Democrats have become openly critical of Bill Maher and John Fetterman, and the divide is no longer being spoken about quietly. Even though both men continue to describe themselves as Democrats, sections of the party have started questioning whether their positions still align with the modern direction of the movement, as their criticism of certain party policies has become more visible, especially on issues like economics, free speech, and foreign policy. Accusations from some internal critics have grown sharper, with claims that they are drifting closer to Republican talking points. The debate intensified further after reports and political speculation that Donald Trump has at times highlighted or entertained the idea of working with political figures outside traditional party lines, which only fueled more discussion in Washington circles. All of this has led to a broader and more uncomfortable question inside parts of the Democratic base: whether Maher and Fetterman were ever fully aligned with the party's current trajectory to begin with.
Able to sit in Starbucks all day for the price of a scone? From music to Wi-Fi to birth control, it's not such a jarring proposition when socialism comes along and says you are entitled to free stuff. And that, in turn, must be why there's this proliferation of websites like Kickstarter and GoFundMe. GoFundMe.
That older Bill Maher clip is often used as a blunt critique of how some modern political messaging frames democratic socialist ideas. The argument, in essence, is about a best-case scenario version of policy, where services expand, costs disappear for individuals, and the financial burden is assumed to be handled elsewhere without difficult trade-offs or consequences. Critics of that framing say it tends to downplay the reality that large-scale public programs always involve funding choices, taxes, and limits. Supporters of politicians like Bernie Sanders argue that these policies are about restructuring priorities to reduce inequality, while opponents see the messaging as overly simplified or idealized. Over time, debates around terms like the rich have also become more complex in political rhetoric, with critics pointing out that definitions can shift depending on context and argument. And commentary discussions, Maher has sometimes used humor and satire to describe what he sees as an overly idealistic belief that complex economic realities can be solved without sacrifice or trade-offs. Whether taken literally or as satire, the core tension remains the same: how to balance ambitious social programs with the practical limits of funding and implementation in the real world.
Recognize that Zohran Mamdani is the future of the party. Unfortunately, it's the Republican Party. Get it? And if you missed his victory speech in last week's mayoral election in New York, don't worry. You'll see it in every attack ad for the next 2 years. Now, Mamdani seems like a nice guy, and I congratulate him on an extraordinary political achievement. But before the whole left side of the country catches socialism fever, let's listen to the other big winner, in last Tuesday's election, Virginia Governor-elect Abigail Spanberger, who before the 24 election said things like, if the party didn't shift to the...
Bill Maher has offered his own theory for how parts of the Democratic Party's modern messaging and voter expectations have shifted over time, and he often frames it around the idea of free stuff becoming a powerful political incentive. In his view, a growing expectation that government should continuously expand benefits without clear trade-offs has influenced the tone of progressive politics, where demands for more public support are sometimes met with less discussion about cost or limits. He suggests this mindset didn't appear overnight, but developed gradually through cultural changes, like the rise of streaming services normalizing low-cost or all-access content, and crowdfunding platforms such as GoFundMe making it easier for individuals to rely on collective financial support for personal crises. From there, he argues, the same expectation can spill into politics, where proposals like free transit, expanded public housing, or universal services gain popularity as ideas of entitlement and fairness evolve. Maher's central point, as he presents it, is that once expectations of free or heavily subsidized benefits become politically normalized, they tend to expand rather than contract, creating a cycle where parties that lean into those expectations may struggle with long-term fiscal and political consequences.
At least the party has a clear choice here, very clear. One wing is saying don't ever use the word socialist again, and one is saying,
I am a democratic socialist.
Clear, huh? So how do we decide who's right? Well, it turns out we don't really have to flip a coin. We have the evidence. In 2024, 13 Democrats won in districts Trump also won, all moderates. This isn't rocket science. All the left-leaning think tanks have done autopsies on 2024, and they all came up with the same message: move to the center.
Not every Democrat agrees with the more progressive direction of the party, and there are still voices inside the coalition raising concerns about its long-term electoral strategy and messaging. Bill Maher, for example, has been openly critical at times of what he sees as overly ambitious or ideologically driven policy ideas, warning that they may not align with the preferences of more moderate or swing voters. At the same time, figures within the party such as Abigail Spanberger have previously cautioned Democrats about moving too far left in ways that could create challenges in competitive districts, especially in national elections where centrist voters play a decisive role. Similarly, John Fetterman has at times positioned himself as a more moderate or working-class focused Democrat, occasionally breaking with party activists on messaging and policy tone. These internal disagreements reflect a broader tension inside the Democratic coalition, between progressive activists pushing for expansive structural change and more centrist figures emphasizing pragmatism and electoral viability. The result is an ongoing debate about strategy, identity, and how far the party can shift ideologically while still maintaining broad national appeal.
The New York Times, which did so much to promote woke politics, now says the partisans are wrong. Moving to the center is the way to win. And Democrats should recognize the party moved too far left on social issues after Obama left office. Gosh, if only someone had been saying that all along.
A common argument made by political commentators is that the Democratic Party's progressive wing may be out of step with parts of the broader electorate, based on recent election results in competitive districts. In several closely contested races, some overlapping with areas that also supported Donald Trump, successful Democratic candidates have often been described as more moderate in tone and policy positioning rather than strongly progressive or ideologically left-wing. From this perspective, the takeaway some analysts emphasize is that voters in swing regions tend to respond more strongly to pragmatic messaging focused on everyday concerns like the economy, cost of living, and local issues, rather than more ideological or expansive policy agendas. Supporters of progressive politics disagree with this interpretation, arguing that bold policy ideas can still resonate when properly communicated. Ultimately, the debate reflects a broader strategic divide inside the party about how to build winning coalitions, whether through centrist positioning in competitive states or through energizing a more progressive base in already reliably Democratic areas.
The New York Times, which did so much to promote woke politics, now says the partisans are wrong. Moving to the center is the way to win. And Democrats should recognize the party moved too far left on social issues after Obama left office. Gosh, if only someone had been saying that all along.
There it is, the Democratic Party standing at what many describe as a critical crossroads in its modern political identity. From this perspective, Voices like Maher and John Fetterman are often cited as internal critics who continue identifying as Democrats while warning that certain messaging or policy directions may struggle in general elections. Supporters of this view argue that proposals associated with the progressive wing are difficult to sell in competitive swing states, while critics of that argument say it oversimplifies voter behavior and ignores the appeal of more expansive social programs. Figures like Abigail Spanberger are frequently referenced in discussions about moderation and electoral strategy, especially in districts where outcomes are decided by narrow margins. Ultimately, this reflects a long-running tension inside the party between ideological ambition and electoral pragmatism. Different wings interpret the same election data in very different ways, and that disagreement continues to shape how Democrats define their platform moving forward.